give a chance for everyone to join, I think.
Yeah, sounds good.
I'm gonna.
Great.
They are all in now.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Agony Aunt Q&A session with Andy King, who we're very excited and fortunate to have with us today. As I'm sure a lot of you already know, Andy has extensive experience in student fundraising from his East African playground days. I'll let him introduce himself a bit more in a minute. But in the meantime, just a couple of housekeeping rules for the Q&A. Any questions that you do have, could you please pop them in the session chat, which you should find a button for at the bottom of the screen. And also as well, if you could introduce yourselves in the chat, just so we know who's with us today, that would be absolutely amazing. But yeah, apart from that, Andy, I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll go from there.
Cool, thanks, thanks Josh. I've shaved today to try and make myself not look like Grandad of Rag. It's exclusive aim there. I've been involved in student fundraising since about 2012, having done a variety of things from being a RAG secretary to being a challenge leader to being a RAG president. And then I spent 4 years working at East African Playgrounds as a professional student fundraiser. And I've been at every RAG conference, if you're including this as a RAG conference, which I think you probably should be, since 2014. And though they are incredible sessions, and I've got one of the things that I noticed is that often people are speaking about really high level concepts or just using buzzwords a lot of the time like raids that can leave some people behind. And so we thought it'd be a fun idea to just basically have a chance to ask any questions you like. And I have no bias because I don't work for a charity anymore. I work for a consultancy that help charities with their company partnerships. So I can give you unbiased advice or answer any questions that you would like. Anything from what is a raid up to how do we get more members. But please do post any questions that you have yourself. Hopefully this session is for you as much as possible.
Right, amazing. Thank you, Andy. So yeah, basically, if you have any questions, again, just please pop them in the chat, and we'll get going as soon as possible. Literally, guys, the questions can be anything to your fancy.
It's nice to see some friendly faces in the chat. I'm still hoping that Beavis will come on with his baby. I'm a big fan. A question has come through, which is what are the biggest challenges that you think are facing RAG/fundraisers this year? Which is a great question from Rosie. There are plenty of challenges. There always are, but this is a particularly difficult time. And I think probably the biggest issue coming up will be about maintaining engagement from afar and supporting your challenge event participants that should have gone out this summer and trying to keep them engaged and motivated to go out next summer, if at all possible. I know that your challenge providers and charities will have been giving as much support on that as they can. But the thing that I would really focus on is making sure that you can capture all the excitement that has been there in the past, and rather than try and do anything groundbreaking new, just try and hold on to what you've built before and keep going in that way. Baby Beavis is out for a walk. We'll see him later, I'm sure.
So we've had another question come in from Beatrice from Warwick Crag, your old stomping ground, Andy.
Yeah.
As a former RAG president, what advice do you have in regards to managing leadership and maintaining a safe and healthy space in your committee?
That's a really good question, and I think it's really important that you're, as a RAG president, that you're able to give your committee the space to take things on for themselves, but also that you work as a team and that you're able to challenge and support each other in equal measure. The advice that we would give there is to really, as much as possible, create an open space for your committee. One of the things that I've learned to do since being a RAG president about making sure that voices are heard is, if you come to a committee meeting with a question such as, what challenge events should we run this year, ask people to take 2 or 3 minutes to write their thoughts into the chat box and hit send at the same time, rather than just letting the people who are extroverted speak, because that way you're going to capture the opinions of everyone in the room. So make sure that you give people in meetings the time to think about their questions, or to think about their answers, or to think about their thoughts, and make sure that you invite everyone to speak and be heard is one piece. And then the second piece to know is that you should, as much as possible, try and bring your whole committee with you in the decisions that you make, but know that it's okay if occasionally they're not unanimous. And actually, you want your committee to be willing to vote against things or to vote for things because that's what they believe, rather than that's because what they think everyone else is doing. And that way you'll have the most balance possible. And then in terms of leadership, it's really important your relationships with each of your committee, so that you know what's going on with them, you know what their key priorities are, and you can support them moving through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that made sense to me. Yeah, positive responses all around. So the next question that we got from Alice is, what advice / tips would you have for finding your first RAG committee?
Great question, Alice. Am I right? Do you have any committee at all to start with? Do you have a president, or are you starting off from scratch, Alice? Would you mind posting in the chat? No committee at the moment at all. Okay, great. In that case, the advice to give is really active recruitment. One of the things that I've seen student unions do really successfully is basically headhunt a potential RAG president. And you want to start with the president or the chair role, or the officer role, depending on what your student union call them, and actively recruit the right person. So it may be that the vice president of your football team is a really positive student and really positive person that's already engaged with the union that you can really bring in and suggest it to them. But the key bit is that a lot of people won't consider themselves for a role because they haven't got experience of applying for one. They might consider themselves underqualified. But if you go to them and say, we think that you would be great as our president and we'll give you all the support you need, it can plant that seed in their head. And then when you've got one student on board, you can start to work with them to recruit the rest of your committee. It'd be a really good idea to make sure that you have a president, a secretary, a treasurer, as most student societies need, and probably 2 or 3 other positions, depending on what you want your fundraising and your RAG committee to look like. So possibly a social person, an events person, and a challenges person. But you can work with that student that you headhunt to shape that committee. Cool.
Amazing. So yeah, the next question we have is from Rhiannon, president of Carnival RAG and on the NASFA committee. She asked, how do you think recruitment for international challenges will change this year? Do you think we will see a decrease?
It's a really good question and a really tough one to answer, because obviously we'll largely be recruiting challenge participants in September, October, November, and things may have progressed from them. I think there will definitely still be those students that are super keen to take on challenges, and if anything, more so than they might have been before, especially those first year students who may have had not gap year plans, but traveling plans between school and university that they haven't been able to do. So there will be a lot of that, but there'll also be a lot more online promotion. For example, if your university is back to full flow by term one, you'll have to make sure that you've worked with your student union and your university to make sure that you can reach those students. But it is well worth starting to have those conversations with your SU and your university departments, if they support you now, to say, we raise this much money every year, which has a huge impact on the world. For example, by working with East African Playgrounds, our RAG Society in the last several years has built X number of playgrounds. Or by working with Meningitis Research Foundation, we know that we've contributed to running their helpline. And we know that that's a difference that the university overall is really proud to make. It's going to be difficult to recruit those students if you would like to look at what additional support you can give us, either through your comms letters or through your Facebook pages. What can we do to support each other to make that difference and have a university impact and experience that we're proud of? Because it's definitely something that will be on their minds too. And starting that conversation now means you may find your university to be much more collaborative than they ever have in the past.
Wonderful. Thank you for that answer, Andy. So the next question that we have is from Joe Zander. I'm sorry if I've pronounced your name wrong there. But the question is, what is the reasonable fundraising target to set for a first year of RAG? So I think what she's asking with that question is if it's your first year as a RAG society, how much should you aim for basically to fundraise?
That's a really good question, and I'd actually like to invite anyone else in the room, the Zoom, to contribute an answer towards that. Because the honest truth is it completely depends on the size of your campus, the size of your committee at the start of the year, the events that you've got planned. We would always recommend, or in my experience, student fundraisers would recommend that you set a low target and absolutely smash it, rather than set yourself up to fail. So setting a target of between £5,000 and £10,000 that's going to push you to achieve, but you know that through a certain number of events you're able to achieve, is a really good place to start. But I'd love to see what other people think about that too.
Okay, we'll see if any responses come through to that in the chat. Yeah, okay.
We do also have the coffee room after this session, and I think talking about targets as a group that can all talk about it would be a really healthy conversation to have.
Yeah. James Beavis, to be specific, he said the first year at Aberdeen raised £50,000.
Great.
And Rebecca said in the chat that when we started out, we set timely targets so that we got an idea of realistic progress.
Both of those are really good to bear in mind. I see that Simon Varley in the chat has commented the Beavis effect for the Aberdeen amount raised, and I think it's worth pointing out that it was Aberdeen's first year, but they had a very experienced RAG chair in Beavis, which probably did make it higher than others would have achieved, and their challenge event recruitment was really positive, I believe. So bear that in mind. And I've just seen that Emma said that they work with charity partners to set targets for each event. And that can be a really good way of coming up with your targets too. If you decide that you're going to run a Paris marathon as your challenge event for the year and a couple of other events, you can speak to the charities you're recruiting on behalf of to set those targets together.
Okay, amazing. Shall we continue the conversation about targets in the coffee shop afterwards?
Great.
Yeah, awesome. So the next question was from, again, Beavis. He asked, what's your advice on talent management? Lots of smaller rags fold and don't fill execs.
It's a really good question, and there's in particular an issue with RAG committees can be what Emma Smith, I know she's in the call, would call the yo-yo effect of a RAG's performance depending on the talent of their committee. A big bit of advice that we would give, and that I mentioned earlier, is to headhunt and to really actively support student growth as much as possible. So whether you're a staff member or a SAB or a RAG committee member yourself, be really actively on the lookout for students that you think could help the committee or be the next president or be the next challenge officer or be the next SAB, and really nurture that talent throughout the year. So, for example, when I started at Warwick, Beavis, who's asking the question, was the RAG president at the time, and he spoke to me about joining the RAG committee probably on my third day at uni. And because of that, he then showed me the conversations that were happening in the committee. He involved me in committee meetings very early, and that meant that by the time I went on to be RAG president, I felt very qualified because I'd had a year of kind of seeing what the job was, and someone else had told me that they thought I could do it. And a huge thing that puts students off is not feeling qualified and not feeling like they could do it. And so making sure that you have a really active recruitment ethos of, we know that you can do this, we'll support you to do this and show you how it can be done, can be really, really beneficial. So making sure that each of the committee members that you do have takes a student under their wings, for example, can be a really positive thing to do. Or if you're a first year committee, maybe asking one of your best student societies, if you have a really active, even if it's a debating society, asking the debating society president to mentor the new RAG president about what being a society president is like can be hugely beneficial just to pass that experience. Society president will get a lot from that too.
Okay, amazing. So the next question, again, is from Beavis. He's quite active in the chat.
It always is.
Um, as rags have evolved, so have their activities. In our time, we've seen raids rise and fall and potentially challenges dropping. What's the next way that students can raise large amounts for charity? That's a really interesting question.
That is a really good question, and if I knew the answer, I would charge you lots of money for it. No, I'm kidding. I think it's gonna be clear in the next year or two what the key ways to raise money are. I don't see challenge events dropping off the face of the earth, because even though international travel is difficult right now, there is still very much the appetite for them, and there are also domestic challenges like a Three Peaks challenge, etc., that I think will still prove popular. However, we are also seeing a major rise in both virtual events. I know that there's a session coming up, I think it's today, with Lee Clark of Gizpenny talking about virtual events. But we're also seeing fundraising ideas that maybe wouldn't have worked in the past really taking off. Like a lovely old man decide his garden, and he raises millions of pounds because of his story and the way that we're working together as a society to want to support him. 3 years ago, that may not have worked in the same way, and so those individual moments of someone telling a story and doing something incredible can really work. I think it will be the ones that not that go viral but have viral potential. My favorite example of a weird fundraising challenge doing really well comes from the 2.6 challenge. So obviously this was a replacement for the London Marathon, where people were challenged to do 2.6 of anything or 26 of anything. and a pet shop in the US decided to have a 26 turtle race and allow people to bet on which turtle they thought would win. And they raised $13,000 overnight from their turtle race. So I think it will be those creative and wacky ideas that really take off, plus virtual events, plus challenge events is my best guess.
Incredible. I never heard of the turtle race one actually, but that sounds like a lot of fun.
Take a look. Take a look. It's so good.
Oh, no, I definitely will do. So the next question we have is from Dennis, a member of the NASA committee as well. He said, or he has asked, working with international charities, how do you check/monitor their ethics and make sure you don't indirectly engage with white savior behavior when working with them? And I think this is actually probably something that you can speak to, given your time at East African Playgrounds, especially.
It is, yeah. So it's a really important thing to consider. I'm really grateful for you asking the question. I have run sessions previously at RAG conference or student fundraising conferences about voluntourism and how to make sure that you don't engage in voluntourism. And I wrote an article for whatcharity.com on basically how to spot an ethical from an unethical volunteering project. And I'll post a link in the chat of the coffee room once I've had a chance to find it. But the key things I would suggest that you do are to really look at them and their messaging, see that you agree with the way that they're portraying the people that they help, and look at what the volunteering itself is. So make sure that it's unskilled labor and that by being there, you're supporting the local economy, not doing things that others could be doing. So for example, to speak about East African Playgrounds, because I know them particularly well, volunteers go out to build a playground, doing the unskilled labor, being supervised by skilled Ugandan staff, and the wages of that skilled Ugandan staff are largely funded by the fundraising that has enabled you to be there. And so it's a win-win in that you get to experience cool whilst also making sure that you are contributing purely positively as you go. So checking out what the volunteering opportunity is, and also checking their impact reporting. There's a really famous example of I hesitate to use the word charity, though they probably officially were a charity, where people would volunteer to go out and build a toilet block, and then those volunteers would leave, they'd knock the toilet block down, and the next set of volunteers would arrive to rebuild said toilet block. And it was effectively a for-profit scheme. And those are one to largely avoid, but they're also very easy to sniff out, and are largely few and far between. So A, check their messaging and check that you agree with it, and B, look at their volunteering and check that the volunteering feels ethical. And then my final bit of advice is have an open conversation with the charity. A very big warning sign about a charity that have white saviorism issues is they get angry about you asking. Whereas charities that know that it's a difficult topic and want to engage you as ethically and considerately as possible will have a really reasoned answer.
Amazing. So the next questions that we have coming up are more career and employability related, just to switch it up a bit. So Beatrice from Warwick Crag asks, how do you make the transition? Oh, sorry, the question's been lost. How do you make the transition from a student in a RAG committee to getting a job in the charity sector after university?
So a great question. And I actually have put together a guide that I can post in the NASA chat about transitioning from student fundraiser to professional fundraiser. The most obvious transition is to go from being a RAG committee member to being either a community or an events fundraiser, just because those are the most common skill set types. So you'd then be working with student committees or with Women's Institute groups or schools to support their fundraising, or helping people who are so it's not transferable skills, it's the same skills. And looking for jobs on charity jobs or on Quarter5 recruitment or Ashby Jenkins are really good places to look for jobs in community and events. But there are other types of fundraising that are really worth looking at too. So if you particularly like essay writing, then trust and foundations fundraising, which is applying for money from big grant giving bodies, is worth looking at. If you were individual giving or legacy fundraising, makes a lot of sense. And if you enjoy working with big bodies of people, then corporate fundraising is also worth looking at. I'll post a link to the grad guide to entering fundraising again at the end. But the big advice would be make sure that RAG is on your CV. Think about what it is in fundraising that you enjoy and look for assistant or officer level jobs in that area. The other bit of advice is speak to the charities that you've supported and ask them if they know of any jobs that are going. That is how I got my job in East African Playgrounds. Was I graduated as they were hiring and I had volunteered for them before, which made it much easier. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely that makes sense. So the next question from Lydia from Plymouth Rag, it's along similar lines. So she asked, what advice would you give to somebody wanting to go into student fundraising after they graduate? But I think the more interesting part of her question is where she asks, what would your advice be, bearing in mind everything going on at the moment and the level of uncertainty that exists within the jobs market?
Yeah, it's a really good thing to be aware of. There are obviously a number of charities that have well-established student fundraising programs, many of whom have representatives or people that have formerly worked there on this call. And it's worth knowing whether or not they are hiring. But the sad truth is that there may be many who aren't. And there may be many team restructures that mean that student fundraising may no longer be a pure job role. You may be doing students and other challenge events at the same time. And again, I'd really encourage you to think about what it is that you get from being a student fundraiser that you really enjoy, and therefore thinking about what other fundraising roles really capture that. So for example, for me, one of the things that I absolutely loved doing was seeing the journey from someone signing up to a challenge event, seeing them do their fundraising, grow in confidence, grow in ambition, really enjoy their fundraising activity, and then have that reward of that really incredible experience, and seeing how for a lot of people it actually, I don't want to say change their life, but like made a notable impact on the journey that they were going on, should we say. And I loved doing that. And I was able to emulate that in the journey of corporate champions. People who volunteer as a corporate champion within a company are often junior staff, and supporting them to run fundraising initiatives for their office often means talking to much more senior people and enables them to really grow in their confidence, run an event that they really enjoy, and get recognition internally for doing. And so I was able to translate it there. But yeah, I think look at what it is that you enjoy specifically, see where it emulates that, and keep an eye on the charities that you know that you'd want to work for, is probably the best advice that I have at this point.
No, that's really good advice. Thank you for that answer. So the next question that we have is from Sophie. She asks, how do you do jailbreak/lost without students going missing? You definitely don't want that to happen. what are some techniques students can use? I've never done it before, but it sounds really exciting. I'm just worried about the safeguarding side of the event.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a student going missing is not a desirable outcome. Again, Emma Smith is on this call, and I just want to highlight her because she is probably queen of safeguarding and due diligence. She's the most thorough risk assessor I've ever met. And so I would strongly encourage that you have a conversation with Emma about it, either in a breakout room later or separately, just because I know that she'll give better advice than I possibly could. But that said, there are some basic safeguarding measures that you can put in place, such as requiring students to text you their location every 2 to 4 hours, every time they get in a car, to text you the license plate of the car that they get into, and to have a contingency plan in place in case you don't hear from a student. So after 2 hours, you call them. After 2.5 hours, you call them again. After 3 hours, you would report it to the police, etc. But there are a number of risk assessments, etc., available. And if you post in the NASFA, the National Student Fundraising Association group chat, to ask people for their risk assessments and their frameworks for how they keep those events safe, I'm sure people would be more than glad to share them.
Okay, amazing. So the next question that we have is from Millie, the new Carnival director, Carnival with a K, who's asking through Dennis, what do you wish you had known before starting your role as RAG president?
What do I wish that I had known? Probably how many calories there are in a bottle of Dr. Pepper, because I drank a disgusting number of those to see me through my RAG presidency. I obviously am kidding. I think the thing I wish that I had known the most was how much fun it would be and how much fun I would get from asking her. Being the head of a RAG is a huge responsibility, and there's always a lot that's happening. But it's an absolute blast. But for me, what made it the most fun was when I was able to engage other people with what was happening and share tasks with them or collaborate or delegate. I think my year as RAG presidency taught me a lot about delegating, but I probably only started doing it properly in the sense I'd been involving people much, much more from the word go, because I got more out of it, they got more out of it, and it was just generally more fun to do something as a pair or as a team. So I think that's probably, but I'll have a think if there's anything else as we go, and I'll let you know if anything else comes up.
The soft drink habits definitely haven't left you. Did you go to Pepsi after Dr. Pepper?
Well, at the moment it's Rubicon, so branching out.
Okay, so the next question that we have is from, again, Beavis. He asks, RAGs used to be ace at utilizing alumni, aka the Ragger bonds. How can RAGs utilize alumni, and are they actually worth it?
That's a really good question. So yeah, you're right. There used to be a really strong alumni network called the Ragabonds, who were basically a group of old RAG members of various capacities that would come along to the occasional event, either for your RAG or for a big charity. So, for example, Meningitis Research Foundation runs a big mega raid every year. A mega raid is a big street collection. The exact definition of a mega raid is contested, but my definition of a mega raid is that it is multiple RAGs. Fight me. A big mega raid, and it was over 2 days, and the Ragabonds would often come and collect at that. Other RAGs have engaged their alumni in different ways. It's quite common to do like an old RAG social to bring them back. I think the key benefit that I've seen RAG committee, if I'm honest, is capturing their knowledge and making it a expectation that if you are the president of RAG in 1 year, or you're the events officer of RAG for a year, that you will be around to support the next one the next year. And making that part of the role description is really, really helpful. The other thing that I've seen a RAG do is Warwick RAG, because I'm part of it. For several years, they had a Facebook message that was just a whole bunch of previous RAG presidents that the current RAG president could then message to say, I'm having trouble with this, or what's the history of this issue with the union? And that was really helpful advice. In terms of engaging them for fundraising, sure, it's worth telling them what challenge events you've got going on, etc. But I've never seen that work particularly successfully. However, I'm conscious that Andy Tribe is in the chat, and he, I think, was the alumni officer, which is a role at Loughborough RAG. So, Andy, if you have any other advice, it'd be great to hear that as well.
No, definitely.
Andy, I don't know if you want to unmute and say anything.
Yeah, he can do if he likes. If he's there. Oh.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, got you.
Sorry, I'm halfway through making lunch.
No, apologies, I caught you out.
I mean, at Loughborough, we had a system where when we did our committee elections, we would assign 2 alumni officers as sort of unofficial committee roles, and which would usually be the committee members that are about to graduate and leave, and you sort of don't give up that role, and essentially that job is just, that person is just there as a sort of the official person. That was my mic going off if you heard that. That person was just the official person to let their year group who had graduated know what was going on. So just like socials or challenge events, exactly all the things you were just saying. It was more just a way of having an assigned person to keep that group engaged. And it does work quite well. It's no different to having a RAG president, like someone like yourself, message all their committee and all the people who graduated. It's just making it a bit more official. It does tend to work. It does help alumni, especially the sort of more social events. And we used to go back to like the fireworks events and help out with volunteering and stuff as well. So it did have a factor. Yes, I'm going to go back to making lunch now.
Thanks, Andy.
Great. Thanks for that, Andy. But yeah, so again, the next question, again, it's another question from Beavis, who asked corporate sponsorship, how to do it, and is it needed? And given your time at Rays of Sunshine and now at Remarkable Partnerships, you might be able to get quite a good answer out of Andy on this one.
Yeah, sure. The first question is it needed? And I think that has to come before the how you do it. And the answer to that question completely depends on the circumstances of your student fundraising group. Some RAGs corporate sponsorship, for example. So it's worth clearing that with your union, whether you're a society or a student group or a union service, and therefore what that means for your corporate sponsorability, should we call it? That's not the phrase, but I've gone for it now. And whether or not it's necessary, because whilst it comes with some significant perks in largely pound signs, it also comes with drawbacks in that you have to offer the corporate something in exchange. So I would say that in terms of building up the capital of your student fundraising group, yes, do that if it's something that you need. Often a student union will support you with some startup costs. So for example, at Warwick, we were able to apply for some grants from the SU itself. Others, I know are funded entirely by their unions, whereas others, if they want money to buy, for example, a mascot costume or to pay for some more printing, they do need to source that from somewhere. And your two options are to do events that raise money for the RAG itself, which I know Loughborough RAG do quite successfully, or to seek corporate sponsorship, which is another great option. Again, there's some pretty good historical advice on forming sponsorship that I can dig up and post in the NASA chat. But the big thing to think about is what and who those benefits interest. And largely the benefit that a student fundraising group can offer is exposure to students from a particular university and often a particular type of student. And that may be of interest to your local sports bar, but it may also be of interest to a graduate scheme. So the year I was RAG president, we received sponsorship from Nationwide, and it was really good because we got a couple of £1,000, I think it was £2,000, and they ran some employability sessions for our committee, which had great mutual benefit because our committee had a stronger idea of what to do when they graduated, and obviously Nationwide were in front of all of our members, and in particular the committee. So put together a bit of a pack of what you can offer and what you would like in exchange, and find the graduate recruitment or marketing, if it's a local business, contacts, and try and have a conversation from there.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer, Andy. And then Beavis asked after that, just simply, when are you coming to visit Scotland?
At the moment, I think if you cross the border, you have to quarantine, which is sad. So after that, but soon.
Wonderful. So we do have about 10 minutes of the session left. So if anybody has any more questions, just quickly post them in the chat. We'll try and get through 2 of them, I think, at most, depending on how detailed the answers are. But if you guys don't have any questions, I do have a couple noted down for Andy, which I think might be quite valuable for him to answer.
I think I saw one in the chat from Rosie about...
Is there one I missed?
On charity/challenge companies, RE volunteerism. There is a standard /seal of approval for safety, which is the BS 8848, which is the British standard of treks and exhibitions. But it is a self-compliant form, so a company or a charity can say, yes, we meet that, tick. So it's worth asking them how they meet that. But that's for safety, not for ethics. A seal of approval for the ethics of a trip. Different trips have different kite marks. So, for example, the Kilimanjaro Porters Association offer a accreditation to Kilimanjaro trips, but there's no universal this trip good. Unfortunately, you do have to do a bit of digging yourself often.
Okay, wonderful. I think one thing, Andy, that might be useful for a lot of people in the call to know, and obviously anybody who's watching afterwards, what would you say during your time as RAG president? What would you say your biggest challenges were, or maybe not even a RAG president, just as a committee member in general?
Oh, my biggest challenges were the Kilimanjaro. No, okay. Biggest challenges were being very honest. We had some difficult committee members that we removed. We had 2 committee members that were negative influences. Is the easiest way to explain it. They went beyond not doing what it was that they were asked to do, but actively did the opposite sometimes, and were not making society members feel welcome at events, etc. And that was really tough because we didn't really know why they were acting like that or how to deal with it. And I had some support from our student union societies coordinator, Danielle. And I think that is my biggest bit of advice for any student on the call about any challenge that you face, is speak to find an ally in the student union, whether it's your designated contact or not. Find someone who's on your side and cares about you both as a person and for the society, and let them know what's going on, because that way they can help you. And we ended up using the constitution to have a vote of no confidence to remove those committee members and replace them. And it was a really difficult thing to go through, but really positive overall, because we then replaced them with 2 new committee members, one of whom went on to be president the following year. So that was a tough thing to go through. And then the other thing that was tough to do was to balance my degree and do RAG at the same time, which probably speaks to a lot of people on the call, which I managed. I scraped the 2-1. Thank you very much. But the advice would be to just prioritize and compartmentalize and have days where you're out of office, because it's not a job. It can feel like you have to be on the whole time, but actually you can be away from your desk as much as you could be if you had a physical desk. So just tell your committee that you're going to be AWOL for the next 3 hours or 2 days or whatever it's going to be, and where they can go in your absence, and go from there.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you for that. And I guess quickly, just to round it off, kind of related to the employability questions that people asked earlier, but obviously it's one thing, working or volunteering for a RAG committee, but it's a completely different thing when you enter the professional world of fundraising. So I think it would be really useful for people to get your thoughts on, what do you see as kind of like the biggest challenges when transitioning from a RAG to an actual, charity when you're, in a professional environment, or even biggest differences that you might notice?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. As biggest challenge and differences you might notice are quite different. And I think one of the biggest challenges I would say is, especially if you're coming from a RAG background, where it's all RAG, all hours, suddenly having a job that's 9 to 5 is quite a weird transition. And it's really important that you give yourself permission to not respond to messages that come in after 5 p.m. or before 9 a.m. until the next day. And setting those boundaries can be quite difficult because you're really used to just tackling things as they come in. So turning something that you love doing into a career is amazing, because then you love your career, but you need to make sure that you have it as a career and not as your entire life. And so to just give yourself that guarded space to make sure that you still have other hobbies that you really enjoy doing is really important. And also to make sure that, yes, you've been doing student fundraising for between a year and 3 years, or if you're Dennis doing a PhD, 8 maybe, before you get your job. But the other people in the organization still know stuff, and to listen to them and to know where you are in the hierarchy and follow that as much as you can. And then in terms of what you perceive to be different, one of the things that I really noticed in my first year as a professional student fundraiser was how much I'd spent my year as president being like, this is a big deal. This has never happened anywhere else. This isn't happening anywhere else. How can I deal with this? And then seeing that actually there would be 3 different presidents from 3 different RAGs having the exact same problem, feeling the exact same thing at the same time. And so my advice coming out of that is to, whenever you face a big problem, to take a step back and to ask for help for it, because there are other people in other societies going through the same thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. That makes total sense. But with that question answered, it has unfortunately came to the end of this Q&A session. On behalf of myself and everybody at Nasser, Andy, thank you so much for doing this, and to everybody in the call as well. I think that everybody found it really valuable and really useful. So yeah, thank you so much. And if people want to continue the conversation, we will be going over to the coffee shop, the link that I have posted in the group chat on the right-hand side of your screen. But yeah, thank you so much, Andy.
Great. Cheers, Josh.
Thanks, Andy. I'll close this call now.